My name is Mike McMahon, and I am the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And for the past 3 years, it has been so nice to see all of your faces on screen and to be together in that way. But there is nothing like seeing your faces out here and being together to sing. It's really what a wonderful experience. So I want to say welcome. Welcome to Washington, D.C. and to this centennial celebration of the Hymn Society. We're so glad that you're here. And a special welcome to all of you who are watching online right now and participating with us from wherever you are in the world to be with us. And I'd like all of us in this room to face that camera and wave to greet them. Hello, we are so glad that you are with us as well. I'd like to sing about some of the people who are here for special welcome, and I'm wondering if you are at a Hymn Society gallery for the very first time, would you please stand up? We are so glad that you are with us. This is such a wonderful community, and we're so happy that you're part of it with us this week. If you have come here from outside of North America, from Asia, or Africa, or Latin America, or the Pacific Islands, or the Caribbean, or any other part of the world, would you please stand up? I forgot to mention Europe, right? But among us, as you saw on stage this morning, the lovely scholars leading us in prayer, and they are such an important part of our gathering together. Lovely scholars, would you mind please standing, please, so we can greet you? The work of this community is guided by the executive committee, which is our board of directors, and it's always looking at the vision of where we are going as a society. And I'd like you to see their faces so that if you want to talk to anybody during the week about the Hymn Society, you can do so. So executive committee members, would you please stand so that people can see who you are? This conference was about 2 years in the making, perhaps a little more given the vision that the EC set out for us. But the planning team that worked to bring this conference together did an extraordinary job over Zoom over a long period of time and set the direction and chose the kinds of events that we would have. They were guided by co-chairs, Jonathan Hain and Melissa Haupt. I'd like them to stand so that you can see them. I'd like to invite them to come forward to greet you.
Thank you, Mike. Friends, what a joy and a blessing it is to see and hear this group gathered together again. My name is Melissa Haupt, and I had the privilege of serving with Jonathan as co-chairs of the 2022 Program Planning Committee. And on behalf of that committee, we also say, welcome. Welcome to those of us who are able to be together in person from all around the world. And welcome to those who couldn't be here in DC, but who are joining online and in spirit, also from all across the globe. We are so glad you are here. I'd like to take a moment to offer a few words of gratitude. First, to the program committee, and as you hear your name, please stand or wave. Sharon Beckstead, Kaitan Chow, Jocelyn Henderson, Maria Montero, Ben Brody, Brian Hain, Mike McMahon, and John Thornburg. This committee has worked diligently and with care and prayer in planning for this conference, and they have been a truly wonderful team to work with. Thank you all. And we are also grateful to Mike, Brian, Stephen, Courtney, and the countless volunteers who have helped make the ideas of our committee into a reality for this week. And finally, thank you to all who accepted the invitation to lead us this week in worship, sectionals, plenaries, featured sections, and hymn festivals. We are so grateful. May this conference continue to create meaningful times and spaces for us as we sing, fellowship, learn, and grow together.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Hain, and it has been my privilege to serve as the other co-chair of the program committee for this year's conference alongside Melissa. And I want to echo first the thanks and praise that Mike and Melissa have already offered, and add a few words of my own as we start the meeting together. Firstly, I am really truly humbled to see all of you here after these past 2 years of planning. It's a great joy to be together in person. Last night, our opening festival was the first time in some years that I've been able to sing alongside some of you, and it was a beautiful foretaste of what I know this week is going to bring. It has been, as you know, 100 years since the Hymn Society in the US and Canada first convened, and through the decades, generations of us have stewarded the great gift of congregational song through tremendous societal change, through cultural revolutions, through liturgical renewal movements, through worship wars, and now through a pandemic. And today, I look out and I see multiple generations of folks gathered from all over our continent and indeed all over our world who are poised to bring us into the future, sharing and enlivening congregational singing in many varied contexts. So this week, we strive to sing the world God imagines, recognizing that while we may be witnesses to and even participants in God's vision of a lovingly reconciled world, it is the Holy One who, through divine agency, inspires all of our songs. To paraphrase one of my favorite hymns that I sang damn near every Sunday, I think, as a kid, I'll be asking God this week, God of the sparrow, God of the whale, God of the swirling stars, how do your creatures sing all? How do your creatures sing praise? I'm so looking forward to exploring those questions alongside you this week. Thank you again for your presence here and your gifts, and I hope you have a great day.
Good morning. Being conflicted on whether to maintain the easygoing nature of our usual gatherings and the formal importance of this centennial celebration, I have decided to go with the mullet of outfits. Business on top, party on top. A reminder, masks at all conference sessions except for the leader who's on the podium should be worn. If you need a mask, just see the staff and we'll happily provide you with one. If you need hearing assistance, if you need hearing assistance, we have devices in the back, both T-coil technology as well as a pack with headphones that you can plug into. The headphones are provided, or you can use your own. Please go to the sound booth for any session in the plenary space for hearing assistance. Brief directions to Hannon and McMahon Hall. In our sectionals today, starting this afternoon, Most of the sectionals are in this building, on this floor. But there are a few sectionals in Hannon Hall. If you go out the second floor where you came from in McMahon parking lot and you make a right, that building will be Hannon. There are 3 sectionals or sectional rooms in Hannon. If you go straight forward to McMahon parking lot and make a left, that is McMahon Hall. There is just 1 sectional room there, McMahon 200. If you have any questions about directions, ask Jorge Lockwood. If you have any problems, see Stephen or Courtney at the check-in desk. Digital participants, if you have any problems, you can email stephen@thehymnsociety.org. Silent auction. I think this might be the largest silent auction we've had ever. It's huge. Thank you all for your donations. We've been storing them up for like 3 years, so. The silent auction is found in the bookstore, which is directly behind me in the last hallway. There's a bookstore where you buy things. Thank you to GIA for running that once again this year. And then there's the Loveless silent auction. You'll see cards, and you can bid on anything you want. It will close on Wednesday afternoon, Kelly? It'll close on Wednesday afternoon so that they can tally up the results, and then people can pick their things up before we leave the conference. So please bid generously. All proceeds from the silent auction go directly to support the Lovelace Scholarship. The Centennial photo display is right over there against the wall on the tables. Some of our volunteers, Sharon Beckstead and the Richardson family, the ones that take photos. We have multiple Richardson families. Put together a wonderful display of as many years as they could find. And they put them together so that you might find yourself or someone you know in our history. And now, for the important part of the announcements. The reigning Mrs. Hymn Society will present the winner of this next competition with a sash. The winner of this competition today will take their place in the finals on Thursday, so that the winner between the three winners, the grand champion, I'm making this up as I go along, the grand champion on Thursday will be crowned the next Hymn Society reigning person. The competition is who came the farthest to get here. They will receive the well-traveled sash.
Wow.
You can go ahead and come on up here, I guess. All right, so if you came at least 100 miles, I don't know how many that is in kilometers. 100 miles to get here, please stand.
Whoa. I'm gonna have to narrow it down.
If you came over 500 miles to get here, please keep standing.
Whoa.
If you came 1,000 miles to get here, keep standing. If you came 1,500 miles, 1,500 miles or more, please keep standing. If you came over 2,000 miles, please keep standing.
Whoa.
If you came over 3,000 miles, keep standing. I don't know how high to go. If you came over 5,000 miles to get here, is that too far? Okay, 4,000 get here. All right, I think we have.
7,000
All right, let's just. How many miles do you think you came?
7,000 kilometers.
Can someone get their Google out? And I don't know. We need to switch.
Roughly
This should be
5,000 miles.
4,300 miles.
4,300 miles.
11,000 kilometers.
11,000 kilometers.
Wow.
11,000 kilometers. Can anyone beat 11,000 kilometers?
1,800 miles.
Oh, I don't know. Hold on.
11,000 kilometers. Dixon is
Stand by.
our sound person.
Wait. What's your name? 13,000.
Annie.
Or 14,000 almost.
14,000 kilometers.
How many?
I think it just
14,000 kilometers going once.
Pacific side.
14,000 kilometers going twice.
That's you.
Annie from Taiwan.
Oh!
From Taiwan.
Wait.
Come on up. And we'll call it a tie. You can determine between our Taiwanese contingency who gets the well-traveled sash. This is Annie. She is, yeah, come on up. This is Annie. Can you make it? She will represent the well-traveled contingency on Thursday. Are you here on Thursday? Okay, good. On Thursday, she'll represent and hope maybe crowned the next Mrs. Hymn Society. So give it up for Annie. Thank you for crowning so far. And now, while you actually are here, David Hemnes from IAH, our partner organization in Europe, will introduce our plenary speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Scott Humness, and I'm from Norway. My background's from Australia and Norway. And I'm Vice President of the International Arbeitsgemeinschaft für Hymnologie, which is, the International Fellowship in Hymnological Studies. The people that are observant, and that includes all hymnologists, will notice on the PowerPoint presentation on the far left-hand corner a little logo which says IAH. Now that is, a reason for that is that we have a joint conference. And it is my pleasure, on behalf of all our members across the globe, to extend greetings from the IAH to all who are viewing this online, and to all those here present at this joint conference between the Hymn Society of USA and Canada, the Hymn Society of Great Britain and Ireland, and the IAH. And today's first speaker, the first plenary, in fact, for the whole conference, is going to be addressed by Martin Hoondert. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Martin Hoondert, who will speak today about ritual music and performativity. The floor is yours.
I will. Pleasure. So, thank you, David, for introducing me, and thank you for having me here and being willing to listen to me for about 45 minutes, I think. Let's just start. The Roman Catholic liturgy in its Latin version, oh, I have to say the next slide, because Ryan is going to help me. The Roman Catholic liturgy in its Latin version ends with the words Ite missa est. Ite missa est. This is the hymn to song.
How exactly to translate this short sentence is somewhat unclear. Well, several possibilities. The literal translation is clear. Go, this is the Mass. This sounds a bit silly, but we should take this translation seriously. So, go, this is the Mass, means that the purpose of celebrating liturgy, celebrating the Mass, the purpose of doing that is you have to go, or rather leave, go out into the world. So the intention of celebrating liturgy is not for you to linger in the liturgy, instead you are to go out and work on building a world that God dreams of. As said by David, my name is Martin Hoondert, and I'm very honored to deliver a lecture today at this special conference where we celebrate the centennial of the Hymn Society. I am based in the Netherlands and work at Tilburg University as an associate professor in music, religion and ritual. I have a background in musicology, theology and especially ritual studies. Next. At this conference I represent, as David already told, the Internationale Arbeidsgemeinschaft für Hymnologie, the International Society for Hymnological Studies, with members across Europe, Africa, Asia, a sister organization of both the Hymn Society of Great Britain and Ireland and the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. Next. Part of my research focuses on the functions and relevance of music in rituals, more accurately, on music as ritual. What music as ritual or ritual music means is something I learned from, among others, the Dutch composer Bernard Huygens. Unlike the Hymn Society, he was born 100 years ago, in 1920. In this lecture, I will use his insights and liturgical compositions to show what ritual music is and how it should be composed. Next. The question of what ritual music is and how it should be composed is central to my lecture. I will answer this question in the context of liturgy. And I know this is a limitation because ritual music is encountered in many different contexts. You can see it here, and like birthday, the soccer stadium, the inauguration of a president, and so on. On all those occasions, music is used to ritualize, to make a special, to mark a special moment, to sing what cannot be said, or to solemnify the moment and to create community. Music functions in various ways in many different contexts, but we always see the same characteristics. Nevertheless, there is one peculiarity when it comes to music in the context of Christian liturgy. In Christian liturgy, it's connected to text, and it stands within the perspective of God's word and prophetic vision of a new world to come. Next. Liturgy is, you might say, accomplished or performed, at least in part, in music. In and through singing and musicking, and musicking is the word the phrasing of the cultural musicologist Christopher Small. So in singing and musicking we do liturgy. And ideally doing liturgy consists of a process of transformation, a rite de passage, a rite of passage. And the Dutch, German, French ethnographer and folklorist Arno van Gennep, who lived 1873 to 1957, he was the first one to use the concept of rite of passage. In 1909, he published a book in French titled Les Rites de Passage, which focused on rituals that accompany life crises, such as from a shift from childhood to adult life, or marriage, or retirement. And these are the types of rituals that are strongly linked to identity and identity formation. And in each rite of passage, Van Gennep distinguishes three phases: separation, transformation, and return. And we recognize these phases in the practice of celebrating liturgy. We enter the church, or place where we congregate, and with this act we step into a new time frame and space where different rules apply. A place where the social roles are redefined, and where we sing, pray, and listen to the scriptures. The phase of separation begins when we leave our homes, when we cross the threshold of the church building, when we sing the opening hymn, and when we fully and wholeheartedly enter the space of the liturgy. Transformation comes through listening to the scriptures, reflecting on the impact of God's word on who we are and what we do, and praying for the Spirit and singing. Then the return, the final phase in Vergenet's rite of passage, takes place at the moment of the send-off, where we are sent out into the world. Ite missa est. Next. Instead of these three phases of Vergenet, the separation, transformation, and return, I prefer to use three verbs that characterize the transformative dynamics of doing liturgy. And I derive these three verbs from the movement of compassion, in Dutch, de beweging van barmhartigheid. It's a social, spiritual movement based in the Netherlands and inspired by a religious congregation called the Congregation of the Brothers C&M. Next. Here the verbs to see, to be moved, and to be set in motion are used. And so to see is the first phase of separation in which we start looking at the world through God's eyes from a religious perspective. To be moved is the second phase of doing liturgy, the phase of transformation. Being moved or affected is the first step to a change. And this change in thinking and doing leads to action when you are set in motion. This is the third phase of returning to the world. Next. So this leads to the following structure of my lecture. First, I will discuss the significance of the composer Bernard Huybers with a focus on his insights regarding ritual music. This is the main and more or less theoretical part of my lecture. Second, I will elaborate or I will, let's say, explore the celebration of liturgy as a spiritual transformative process, using those three verbs to see, to be moved, and to be set in motion. I will apply the principles of ritual music that I learned from Bernard Huybers to these three stages. We will examine these principles here not only by thinking and reflecting on them, but also by singing. So therefore the second part of my presentation is a bit more practical. The main questions for this exploration are as follows. How does music transform us? How does music guide us through liturgy as a rite of passage? Or to phrase it in a different way, what makes music into ritual music? Okay, let's start with Bernard Huybers. So next slide. Bernard Huybers, regarded one of the leading 20th century composers of liturgical music in the Netherlands, and beyond, I dare to say. On July 24, 1922, he was born in Rotterdam. He completed his secondary education at the Jesuit St. Ignatius College in Amsterdam, and he went directly from high school into the Jesuit novitiate and studied music theory at the Amsterdam Conservatory. He returned to the Ignatius College in 1956 to teach music and religion and to direct the choirs of the Jesuits, the high school students, and the Studenten Ecclesia. I don't have a translation for that, but it was the University of Amsterdam Student Church, which was founded in 1960 by the Jesuit Father Jan van Gilsdom. And in this church, a liturgy based primarily on the scriptures had been implemented. It was here that Huybers' collaboration began with his former student, the poet Oosterhuis. In 1962, Oosterhuis and Huybers produced their first liturgical project, an Advent liturgy, for the Studenten Ecclesia. And a similar Lenten liturgy came soon after, followed by a steady stream of all kinds of biblical ritual songs. In 1966, Huybers was one of the founding fathers of Universalaus. That's an international group for liturgists and musicians. To this group, he delivered several papers testing the viability of his theories and compositions. In 1969, he published a book in Dutch, Door Podium en Zaal tegelijk, translated into English, titled The Performing Audience in 72, you can see it there, in which he explored the nature of ritual music, including its form and functionality in the worshiping assembly. Huybers resigned from the Ignatius College in 1972, he left the Jesuits in 1973, and married in 1974. That same year, that's nice to tell, he was appointed professor of liturgical music at the Catholic University of Washington, D.C. His tenure, however, lasted only 1 week, because he had been taken on by the theology department and not by the School of Music, thus falling victim to a Vatican mandate that disqualified him as a former priest from working at the theology department. In 1978, Huybers and his wife moved to France, where he started a new period of composing songs in the traditions of negative theology, feminist theology, and ecological theology, using texts beyond dogmas, beyond doctrines and institutional definitions. About 200 songs, but unfortunately no one sees. Huybers died in France on April 13, 2003. Next slide, please. In the period of 1960 to 1980, the poet Huub Oosterhuis and the composer Bernard Huybers produced about 240 liturgical songs, consisting of psalms in antiphonal responsorial form, strophic songs, acclamations, rounds, litanies, and table prayers, sung Eucharistic prayers. Most of these songs were composed for the Dominicus Church and the Studente Ecclesia in Amsterdam, but they received a national coverage thanks to the Gregoriusblad publishers. Huybers composed more than just hymns, more than just strophic songs. He sought a diversity of forms and composed music that could function as an integral part of the liturgy. The special character of the innovations Huybers advocated must be considered against the background of church music in the first half of the 20th century. This consisted of Gregorian chants, simple polyphonic masters by Perosi and Haller, and the devotional song that was sung particularly outside the liturgy. So he was really an innovator, he did something new. Tony Barr, an expert on Huybers' work and a passionate promoter of it as well here in the United States, he characterizes Huybers' innovative approach as follows. I have a long quote, so Brian, perhaps you could show it. The quote, I read it out loud. From the outset, in response to the liturgical reforms of Vatican II, Bernard Huybers set not only the tone, but the praxis for composing ritual music, embodying the liturgical action rather than merely accompanying it. And in doing so, he integrated text and music, worship and liturgical action into a seamless entity. He drew his mandate from Karl Orff, that music for people should be basic, elementary, and diatonic, espousing a simple step technique of melody within the range of the average member of the community. He was a firm adherent of formula technique, whereby easily identifiable memorable music shapes would characterize his writing. If ritual was for people, or vice versa, the music was which embodied ritual needed to be within the grasp of the assembly, whose members were in every sense the creators of the drama in which they were involved. An overriding concept for Huybers, the theologian and composer, was that of integration, of making complete, of making whole. That's a quite long quote. But in this quote, we find the main principles as set by Huybers regarding the composition of music, of ritual music for liturgy. In short, these three principles are as follows. It's next. The first one is music is the ritual. Here. Next one. Music is an integral part of the liturgy. And the next one, 3, all people can, without practicing, participate in the singing. I will now elaborate on these 3 principles. So I go through these 3 principles. Next one. So first, ritual music is not something extra that we can dispense with. No, it is the ritual itself. It embodies, in Tony Barr's words, the liturgical action rather than merely accompaniment. To understand this, we must not confine ourselves to the lyrics of the hymns, even though text is important. Instead, we must delve into the music itself, into the sound. So I'm talking about sound, and especially into the performative effect of the sound. The question of the performative dimension of music in worship can be approached through various pathways. Please click. One tried and true approach is the doctrinal one that sees music as a gift from God. In the 2007 document, Sing to the Lord of Music and Liturgy, issued by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, this document opens with this idea of music as a gift from God and describes in an almost poetic way the connection between singing, God, worship, people, and community. Quote, God has bestowed upon his people the gift of song. God dwells within each human person in the place where music takes its source. Indeed, God, the giver of song, is present whenever his people sing his praises. This sounds good, doesn't it? But there is a disadvantage of this doctrinal approach, at least according to me. The disadvantage is that it is primarily a matter of words, and do those words, does this statement connect to the experience of music as part of worship? You may say that God is always present when people sing praises to him, but do we experience this? And if so, what is the ground or reason for this experience? So let's try another approach. Another approach is the ecclesiological one, which is the starting point for the American liturgist and religious scholar Judith Kubicki in her book on the music of the ecumenical brotherhood Communauté of Thésée from France. At Thésée, hundreds and even thousands of young people gather weekly, and the hymns used in worship, you know them, invite participants to sing along. Simple in melody, simple in rhythm and harmonies, and they are sung in various languages. And above all, the singing can be embellished, you might say, by instrumental and vocal counterpoints. Kubicki points to the symbolic character of this mode of performance. Please click again. Quote, singing the chants of Thésée, of Berthier, the most important composer of the chants of Thésée, singing these chants then can be understood as participating in a symbolizing activity which has the potential to mediate ecclesial identity. Like Kubicki, I take music as a way of doing. It is an action or performance. Music does not exist in the solidified matter of a hymn book or psalm book. A song or psalm of worship is more than its text. So singing in worship is first and foremost sound, making sound. And in this case, the text is performed in a musical way. So singing is doing, and this activity has both physical and cognitive aspects. Next, the sound of singing does something to those present, and it is this doing something that I want to explore. In addition to Kubicki's book, I take inspiration from the work of the New Zealand musicologist Christopher Small. I already mentioned him, and also in the performance studies. With Small, while Small does not speak of music, it doesn't talk about music in his book, he does use the verb to music. It's click, and also the participle musically. So he does not see music as a thing which you can analyze or things like that, but instead as a process, as something that happens. Then from a broader perspective, Richard Checkner, who wrote an inspiring book, a handbook on performance studies, points at the same phenomenon. Checkner describes this in his book, Performance Studies, Introduction. Please click, where he outlines 7 functions of performances, how we're doing music or musicking as a performance. And those 7 functions or performances, as checked and listed, please click, are as follows: to entertain, to make something that's beautiful, to mark or change identity, to make or foster community, to heal, to teach, persuade or convince, and the 7th function, to deal with the sacred and or the demonic. Some of those functions may raise questions. For instance, is singing in worship also meant to entertain? We tend to approach singing in liturgy mainly in terms of the 6th function, and we see music mainly as a means of catechesis. A song can repeat what the pastor has already said in the sermon, or a song can explain an action such as the sharing of bread and wine. But in addition to the linguistic aspects of the sung text, there is also a non-linguistic side to singing. And this non-linguistic side, the musical tones and also the sound of the text as sound as such, is often overlooked in the analysis of ritual and worship. Next, in everyday language, we sometimes call music the language of the heart, or a universal language. But actually, this immediately gets us in trouble. When we refer to music as a language, the question arises as to what does music refer to? Words refer to something that exists in reality or to a kind of image in our minds. But what do musical tones refer to? Actually, nowhere. This music seems to be a language without meaning. While we know from our own experiences that music can be very meaningful. So I prefer to turn the mindset around. Music is not a language without meaning, but it's meaning without language. Music, in the sense of sound, I'm talking about sound, is not so much about representing something, it's not about representation, it is about presence. The sound is present, imposes itself on us, it acts upon us. The meaning that music has is immediately given in the impact of the sound. For scholars, this is quite difficult, because how can I describe and analyze the meaning of music if it withdraws from language? The 7 functions of a performance described by Tschechner challenge me to look beyond just the catechetical function. Music may also be pleasant, beautiful. It shapes the singing community. It benefits us in some way and forms a musical space in which an encounter with God can take place. It's precisely this that is the performative ritual dimension of music in liturgy. It acts upon the singing community as a physically embodied experience, which is indispensable to the experience of liturgy as a space in which an encounter with God can take place. Perhaps that's what we experienced yesterday evening in the hymn festival. They very much embodied, our bodies were involved literally in the singing. So singing is perhaps first and foremost not about text, not about lyrics, but using your body. It is about an embodied experience. And primarily then, you might say the issue of singing in liturgy is not that much about what we sing, but that we sing. That's important. Next slide, please. Second, and closely related to that first principle, liturgical music should be composed in such a way that it does not interrupt the liturgy, that it does not interrupt the worship. It forms an integral part of it. Huybers considered the liturgy to be a unity from beginning to end. And then you have to remind he did this in the 1960s, and then music actually was an interruption of liturgy. So he was really innovative. In a footnote in his 1969 book, he writes, "The liturgy is a whole, which means very much more than the sum of its parts." And Huybers was inspired by Huub Oosterhuis and his book In het voorbijgaan, it's not translated, from 1968, a year before Huybers published his book, The Performing Audience. And Oosterhuis describes the liturgy as a continuous movement of proclamation, praise, and prayer. So both Huybers and Oosterhuis conceptualize liturgy as an ongoing movement in which the individual elements are attuned to one another, interact with or respond to one another, and work toward growing participation and intensity. Next slide. The third principle Huybers learned me. Ritual music should be composed in such a way that people without musical knowledge or only with little or no practice can still sing. I purposely say sing and not sing along. As singing means entering a musical space. We do something and we produce sound, but at the same time, that very sound surrounds us. How does that sound affect us? What does the sound do to us? How we can try to interpret music, specifically by considering what meaning it conveys and what the relationship is between the music and the text, but we can also try to find out how we experience music. And that distinction between interpretation and experience, interpretation on one hand and experience on the other, is crucial. Interpretation is primarily a cognitive process, where experience is both mental and a physical process. An important part of the experience of sound is closely related to the singing community. And to understand this, I will use a book by Kathleen Herman, who is a music director for the programs of the Institute for Liturgical Ministry in Dayton, Ohio, and a member of the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur. In 2008, she published a theology of liturgical music titled The Mystery We Celebrate, the Song We Sing. In this book, she attempts to understand music from within. And what is that musical experience? And she makes use of theories by various authors. And I pick out just one element of her book. Harman describes music first and foremost as sound. And sound is produced by a body, which refers to an object, an instrument, flute, piano, guitar, whatever, or a person, a singing person. And that object or that person has certain characteristics that determine the nature of the sound. And this is called timbre, that's what you know. And you know, if I sing, it sounds different than when you sing. So the timbre, the specific sound of a body, manifests the inner qualities of the object, the instrument, the person that produces the sound. However, the sound can only be heard if I, as a listener, let my body, my ears, resonate or resound. So hearing allows us to participate in the inner qualities of the source of the sound. The sound you produce is received in my ears. So this aspect means that sound unites. If we sing and make music together, we get true to each other. There is, to a certain extent, a kind of intimacy or a sense of belonging. So sound makes that you engage with each other. And to make this form of participation and engagement possible, Huybers used several compositional principles. He was inspired by the insights and compositions of the German composer Karl Orff and the experience of singing in the football stadium, especially Ajax in Amsterdam. From Karl Orff, he learned the principles of elementary music in which the elements are in themselves sufficient and used in their simplest form and combinations. So musical elements are the building blocks with which we construct melody, harmony, rhythm, and form, and elementary music uses a minimum of these. I'm going to show you in the second half of my lecture because I'm going to sing and then you can see what it means. Next slide, please. Based on this experience, Huybers recommends that there be 3 basic qualities in any liturgical hymn. First, the form needs to be elementary, consisting of relatively short, easily grasped fragments repeated many times. Since there is no time to rehearse, practice needs to be built into the music itself. Second, the melodic fragments must be diatonic, either tonal or modal. Not all the notes on the scale need to be used, and the melody may be limited to a tetrachord or pentatonic pattern. The diatonic nature of the melody will be seen in its intervals and relationships between them. In general, and we will see later on, Huybers uses small intervals such as the second and the third, and rarely a seventh or an octave. And then the third principle, the music needs to be rhythmical. The text rhythms provide vital cues for the composer, and the ease of singing always depends on the ease with which the ear can pick up a rhythm and then repeat it. With this knowledge of what ritual music is and how it should be composed, so with the principles we have seen and also the compositional basic qualities, we will enter the space of liturgy and explore how music contributes to liturgy as a transformative process. Celebrating liturgy means to see, to be moved, and to be set in motion. Here we go. But before we start talking and thinking about concrete examples of music, we have to say something about text, because I said in the beginning, one of the characteristics of singing and liturgy is that it's always linked to text. To sing the world God imagines demands that we see the world as it is, with all that is right and all that is wrong. Many texts, at least as I see it, many texts of liturgical chants seem to skip the phase of seeing. And they speak of sin in only very vague terms. They suffer somewhat from a kind of denial of reality. They do not explore the depth of existence and immediately jump to the theological escape of thinking that God will save the world. I resist this theological escapism. There is no resurrection without death, no salvation without a sense of being lost. Read the Psalms. Let the darkness of the passion of Christ come to you, to see what is going on in our world and to focus our attention. Good texts are needed. Tony Barr, who I already have quoted, writes the following about liturgical text. Please, next slide. Texts are all important, the music serving the text but never becoming the slave of it. The text gave voice to the call of God and the words in which the people could respond. Good text would always feed the mind and the hearts. Bad text were always to be avoided. Of course, we can discuss about this for hours, I think. In the churches of Netherlands, we have been blessed with the great composer Huub Oosterhuis, born in 1933, and as a poet, the most important partner of Huybers. And Oosterhuis, the poet, was much aware of Karel Rahner's dictum that theology is anthropology, and anthropology is theology. Neither is it possible to talk about God without talking about people, nor to talk about people without talking about God. So Oosterhuis discarded the theocentric approach of liturgical prayers and hymns in favor of one that reflected the human condition and the relationship between God and the people. A good example of this way of writing liturgical text is the hymn Voice as a Sea of People. Next slide, please. And you'll find it also in your booklet on page 57. This song with a melody not by Huybers, it's a melody by Rick Velenturp, but accompaniment by Huybers. It refers actually to the Netherlands as a country with a close relationship with the sea. A drowning man calls for help. And this call makes me, the singer of this hymn, human. In this case, the call for help turns out to be the call of God. Ultimately, this is a text about vocation. The original text in Dutch was translated into English by Tony Barr, and I propose just to sing it. And Ben will accompany us. I'm happy. Thank you. This is the first stage of what happens when we enter liturgy, starting to see, to look at the world through God's eyes. Then the second stage, to be moved. The song we are about to sing is a part of Psalm 13, and the compositional principles as phrased by Harbers are clearly visible. You can show it. Next slide, please. So the song starts with "and yet" in English. In Dutch, it's "dan nog." That sounds more beautiful because of the vowels, but okay, "and yet" in English. This text does not stand alone, but can only be understood as part of a larger whole. The song is the continuation of a dialogue and the final stage of an oral conversation and the psychological phase in the lamentation, which is Psalm 13. And it opens with that strong connector, "dan nog" in Dutch, which means "and yet," "still," "even so," or "in spite of." So the opening words "and yet" refer to something said or explained before. So as such, this short hymn could function as a conclusion of a sermon about trusting in God despite setbacks in life. And it's written in such a way that it doesn't interrupt the liturgy. It is one of the elements of that chain of celebrating liturgy. Then we see how elementary music works. In analyzing the music, we see the formulas, the rhythmic cells, the repetition of the formulas, and a melody that develops stepwise using only seconds and thirds. Very easy, actually, to sing. And then the song's rhythmic energy, we will experience when we sing it. That rhythmic energy generates a sense of excitement that goes beyond the meaning of the words and elevates the singers into the area of the religious. Let's first sing this song and then reflect on what happens while singing. Song has also been translated into English by Tony Barr, and I propose we sing twice what's called the statement, just all together. And then we go to the canon. There is an interlude, very important, the interlude. So wait, group 1, group 2, and we sing twice in canon. So you sing in total 4 times the same text. Let's try it out. I find this very exciting, so let's try it. And yet I cling to you, hold fast to you.
whether you like it or not. And in or out of your good favor, I shall cry out, save me, or perhaps just love me. And yet I cling to you, hold fast to you, whether you like it or not. And in or out of your good favor, I shall cry out, save me, or perhaps just love me. The musical experience of this song, that is the embodied physical experience of musicking, leads, I hope, to a sense of belonging and also to a strong focus on the music itself. From a psychological perspective, we might call this way of singing, this state of being, we might call this flow, when you can do only one thing, and that is singing. The psychologist William James, the founder of the transpersonal psychology, refers to this kind of state as a unitive experience, which is an experience of unity within the environment, with other people, and the universe. And this immersive experience, these experiences are transpersonal because they reach beyond the self. We could say that this musical experience offers us an interpretation of a reality that is not yet realized. I have to say, next slide, and I think even another one. Yeah, that one. So it offers us an interpretation of reality that is not yet realized, a reality that we long for, like a utopia, but one that is also fascinating and which, with the music, transforms us and sets us into motion. In and through the musical experience, we are able to interpret reality as a unity. And this unity is created by the music and the musical performance itself. And it is given to us as participants in the performance while we engage with the music. So music does not refer to this unity. How should it do this, given that it's only sound? No, music presents this unity. Music is essentially, I already said, not about representation. Music does not refer to anything else, but instead it is about presence, the experience of which is liberating and transformative. So that's the second stage of doing liturgy. Then we go to the third stage, next slide, to be set in motion. So this transformative experience of musicking leads to the third and final step of the three-phase process of worshiping: to see, to be moved, and then third, to be set in motion. In his reflections on music, the German philosopher, sociologist, and composer Theodor Adorno linked the musical experience with what he called the absolute. Music makes the absolute present and reaches it immediately, that is to say, without mediation, but at the same time obscures it, as when a strong light blinds the eye, which can thus no longer see the things that are actually properly visible. The musical experience carries with it the tension between being and non-being or not being. Music reveals to us being, but it is not being itself. The experience of unity, of being, and of an utopian but fascinating reality sets us into motion to realize the not yet. This experience is reflected in the following song by Oosterhuis and Huibers we are going to sing, translated once again by Tony Barr into English. It's called in Dutch, Dat wij volstromen, in English, May the breath of life surge within us. And you see in your book, page 60 or 61, you can choose, that we sing it first all together, 3 strophes, and then we go back to the beginning and sing it in canon, how do you say it in English? With the 2 groups, just the same groups as we had before. Can you introduce? Thank you. I always feel a bit guilty when I talk about music the way I've so far. While I do use words, I find they can be so meaningless when it comes to evoking and interpreting the musical experience. Through this lecture, I've realized once again how words are very inadequate when I really want to say something about the powerful impact of music in the context of religion and ritual. I hope I've made clear how in the interplay of text and music in particular leads us to experience reality differently, and that it is the music that awakens in us a longing for unity and salvation. So, sing the world God imagines is really a very good theme for this conference. If we understand singing first and foremost as participating in music, as sound, as musicking. Next slide. Thank you for your attention.
We have. Okay, all right. Yeah. We have time for Q&A. So I have a wireless mic. I'm happy to come around so you can ask your question, which is particularly important for our digital registrants so they can hear what question is asked. Also, digital participants, if you want to ask anything, please put it in the chat, and Jonathan is monitoring that and will let me know. So, questions?
So one of my favorite pieces by this composer and text writer is When From Our Exile. And I think it's now Home From Our Exile or something like that. And it's quite harmonically complex, but is very effective in liturgy. And when you were describing the simplicity and the direct nature of all that you have presented, I have this motet that I know from them that is rhythmically and harmonically quite divergent from these other principles. And so they did do other kinds. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, very good question. Huibers and Oosthuis started with that more or less simple songs, let's say that way, very elementary, and they continued composing that kind of songs, but they had the possibility both in the Dominicus Church in Amsterdam and the Studentenecclesia to work with a choir. And they started working with more elaborate compositions, especially in the 1970s, so a bit later on, in which there was a combination of the choir singing very complex music sometimes, but always with elements in it for all the people, in which they could just join in. And so that's the booklet that Huibers wrote is in Dutch, door podium en zaal tegelijk. So that means by the performers and the audience together. And so there's a kind of there are separate roles, you might say, in who's doing what. But in the end, you need both parties. You need both the cantor and the presider and the choir and the people to make it work. So I'm not sure what song you're referring to because the English title is. Oh, that's Psalm, one of the Psalms, yes. The refrain is quite simple. But indeed, the verses are difficult because you have that modulation in one of the verses, and that's quite difficult. But the refrain, which you can all sing along, is quite simple. Yeah.
Can you speak to the prohibition for not using modal music as opposed to diatonic? Can you give any more detail about why?
So why diatonic music?
As opposed to, he says, do not use modal.
Both the tonal and modal. Both is diatonic. So he uses both.
Oh, did I misunderstand?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
thank you.
It's both. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a question around the rites of passage aspect of your talk. I'm thinking about, for instance, the song "Let Us Break Bread Together" as a communion ritual. So doing the song itself is a part of the ritual for some people, and I think in our congregation in particular, we're aiming at preserving the traditions while making space for the new rituals, maybe new songs that people can associate with different elements of worship. So I just wondered if you could speak to ways that choir directors and other church leaders might work towards creating those new rituals in this context, or like with this framework.
Yeah, so I think the module I presented about what liturgy is or should accomplish is a very broad model in which you can add all kind of small rituals. So it's the broad structure of liturgy, of doing liturgy, but I think within each phase you have actually smaller rituals which are also make use of music, which music is indispensable. So we can go levels deeper in analyzing the liturgy or doing worship, doing liturgy, in going into all those three phases to see what kind of music is needed. So we all know that if we start with the liturgy, we need some other repertoires than when we end or are in the middle, and sometimes we are more reflecting and we need more reflective music, and sometimes more cheering up and we need more enthusiastic music. So we can analyze all these three different phases from that musical perspective and to see what kind of music we need. And I think that's an ongoing process, and that's an ongoing process both because communities change and they need new types of music, and also content-wise, so that's also my perhaps challenge to the lyric writers and the poets, that we always need text that envision the world in which we live or want to live, the utopian vision of the world we want to live in. And in the situation we live right now, there are so many complexities in society, and that is part of our liturgies. That's part of who we are, so it should be part of our liturgies. And I think that's really a challenge also for the poets and hymn writers. So on both levels, the musical level, at three levels actually, the musical level, the ritual level, and the content level of the lyrics, we need to develop and to take on board also new hymns, to make sure that we celebrate the liturgy with which we can identify. I think that's the most important thing.
We have a couple of questions that are related from our online viewers. Simi says, first, before we experience unity through music or singing, we have this kind of expectation that is not the performance itself. So they ask, what comes before? That is, for me, performance is always a second stage of something. We must consider the previous thing. And on a related note, Jane thanks you for these very hard, real, and strong words, but how do we prepare congregation? How do we permit room for these kinds of deep emotions?
Starting with the first one, so what is first, the experience of unity or the performance which leads to community? So I would say, but I'm open to discussion, of course, that in the doing, in the singing, the unity, the community comes into being. When you start singing, you experience that you are a community. So that's what I try to explain with what sound does, and that you share the inner qualities of your body with someone else. So you know that experience. If you sit to someone who you don't know and you hear his voice while you sing, you feel united. Then the community starts to be something which is real. Of course, you enter the church and you know you are a community, but to experience that you are a community needs that musical experience. So that's the reason I say it's first the performance and then the community. But from that starting point of experiencing community, not from knowing it is here, but experience it. That's the difference. And there you need the community. And perhaps you can repeat the second half of the question, because the mic is already there.
Thank you. So the second half of that question was, now I got to get back to it here. Yeah, so before we experience unity through the type of singing, we have this kind of expectation that is not performance itself. So Jane had a similar question. How do we prepare the congregation for this? How do we permit room for these kinds of deep emotions?
Yeah, so how to prepare the community for doing this is just by doing this. Actually, that's the simple thing, and that's what I liked. For example, for the morning prayer, for me, all the songs were new, but I felt invited to join, and so it demands good musicians. That's one thing, good leaders, and then you can do this. So you need to be taken on board actually in this way of performing music, and that's also what Bernard Huibers was working on. So how to compose the music in such a way that people feel invited, and of course we are a hymn society where we sing very easily. But if I look at my congregations in the Netherlands, I really have to challenge them to sing. So I need a repertoire to which they feel invited to join in. And the three songs, just 3 examples we've done, I think they invite to musicking, to take part in the music, because you can just do it. If you hear it once, then you can join.
Part of preparing people to sing is to provide them with a space that is conducive to singing. And many of our churches have been built in ways that are not conducive to singing, but only to speaking. And so the prior question of how do we gather community has not been addressed in the spaces in which we are asking people to gather. So part of the role of those of us who care about congregational song, it's not just that we are doing something decorative when we are asking people to sing, we are doing something essential.
Yeah, and so what you add to it is also the impact of space, buildings, and that's really huge. That might be another lecture, I think, but but the space should be such a way that you can experience the other hearing, singing next to you. And if you can't hear the other singing, then you don't have that experience of being together. And so I was in the church next door here, so the big one, and in the last hymn we sung, the organ was playing so loud that I couldn't even hear myself singing. So it didn't feel very united. I felt overwhelmed with this kind of violent sound actually, and did want to run away actually. So it needs really a lot of thinking on how to do this, how to build up spaces, to make use of furniture and things like that, to make sure that people can hear each other and sing together.
I'll take the last question. Are you going to lunch?
Sure.
Okay, so if you want to ask any further questions or just have a wonderful lunch partner.